Class is now in session. Professor Stern's teaching you how to save an offseason. The New York Mets, very busy, got themselves a new center fielder, and they got themselves a front-line ace. Welcome in another episode of the Believe in Mets pod. That's Jack. I'm Chris, talking all things New York Mets. And boy, this is not the episode we expected to do today. Thought we were going to talk about Bo Bichette's introductory press conference. Thought we were going to talk about what's next for the New York Mets. David Stern said, don't worry about it. I got your answer. Jack, how are you, my friend?
Chris, I'm good. There's a lot of really good content to discuss here on the podcast today. The Mets have, within the span of about a week, completely flipped the narrative of what this offseason looked like. And we were talking about in the pre-show, Chris, it's almost like the offseason doesn't end in November and December. It's almost like when the calendar flips to the new year, it doesn't mean the team is set in stone. It doesn't mean the Mets are fielding at the start of 2026 the season, the same team that they came into the calendar year with. Moves can still happen between December 31st and the start of spring training. And I mean, boy, these are two massive, massive moves that the Mets have made in just the last 24 hours.
Yeah, we're going to try to get to both of them here in our normal, 25, 30-minute episode. First half's going to be dedicated to the new center fielder, Luis Robert Jr., and then the back half, the new ace of the New York Mets, because literally 10 minutes before we decided to hit the record button tonight, Freddy Peralta is joining the New York Mets. A huge trade, massive trade. Mets gave up a lot to get him. That'll be in the back half of the pod. I was joking with you in the pre-show, Jack, that I was kind of surprised that more stuff happened. My head hit the pillow last night. And we had seen the report, I believe it was John Heyman, that Cody Bellinger was down to his last couple of teams and that he was going to decide in the next couple of days. And I thought to myself, with my head hitting the pillow last night, like, okay, the Mets are introducing Bo Bichette Wednesday morning, afternoon. They're not going to, trample all over that media availability and that press conference with other news. Little did I know that David Stearns had not one but two magic tricks up his sleeve. We'll start with the one that broke late Tuesday night into Wednesday morning as the Mets made a trade with the Chicago White Sox to land center fielder Luis Robert Jr. So after all this time of speculating that the Mets would trade for Luis Robert Jr. to play center field, they ultimately make the trade. It's a pair of prospects going back, headlined by Luis Angel Acuna, and the Mets are buying low, right? Robert's got 1 year left on his deal, a player option for 2027, coming off one of the worst years of his careers. But Jack, the Mets get exactly what they are looking for in a player these days. Defense, speed, the ability to crush lefties, and we'll get into what makes Robert such a good fit for the New York Mets, but I'll give you the floor to share your overall thoughts on this move for the Mets.
Yeah, this is, I think, a massive, massive win for the New York Mets. I've been following Luis Robert's career, actually, since he was in the minor leagues. One of my first gigs ever was an internship with a company that focused on Latino baseball players. And my first ever article published on the internet, you can look this up, is about Luis Robert making his way to the major leagues from the minors. And obviously, I'm based in Chicago as well, so I've seen him play, in my backyard here in Chicago at Rate Field. Look, he obviously has had two really bad seasons following up his All-Star year in 2023. In that year, he hit 38 home runs, stole 20 bases, had an OPS of 857, and since then his OPS has not crossed the 670 mark. But I just think when you look at the White Sox as an organization and what they've been doing kind of the last few years, and you look at the Mets and what they've been doing the last few years, they're pretty much on polar opposite ends of the spectrum. The White Sox have not been in a win-now mode really since 2021. They've sold off a lot of their veteran players. They're trying to kind of create this rebuilding thing, and I think trading away Robert is part of that. The Mets, on the other hand, are a perfect change of scenery for a young player like Luis Robert. He's 28 right now, and they have the development at the major league level. They have the hitting coaches. They have a much better system in place, a lab, so to speak, to develop these players even after they've reached the major leagues and kind of get the most out of a player like Luis Robert, who you said already is coming in with elite fielding, elite speed. I'm looking over here at a StatCast page, 93rd percentile in range for a center fielder, 90th percentile in sprint speed. He's a guy that steals bases. Last year he had 33 of them. And I mean, this is a massive win, not just from what Luis Robert brings, but the Mets didn't have to give up a ton for him, Chris. Luis Angel Acuna and a 12th round pick from last year's draft. And part of that is because the Mets are eating all of the money, so to speak, to of Luis Roberts' contract, $20 million this year. There's a club option for next year for another $20 million. But I just am loving that they're able to get a player with the ceiling that Luis Robert has for as low a price as Luis Angel Acuna, who, let's face it, was kind of a defensive replacement, late inning guy, bench player for the Mets going forward. And with the amount of infielders the Mets have on this team, including Bo Bichette, including Marcus Semien, including Brett Beatty, including everyone that was already on the roster, Acuna was not going to have a spot to play in 2026. And this is just a massive upgrade in terms of what the Mets needed versus what they gave up.
Yeah, the joke at the press conference today was the Mets were playing 4 shortstops on the infield going into the 2026 season. And so it made players, not just Luis Angel Acuna, who was moved in this deal, but Ronnie Mauricio, Mark Vientos. It kind of made them all redundant. So the expectation was one of them was going to go. I think the conventional wisdom at the time was that they would trade one of those players as part of a package for a starter, and that they would sign somebody like a Cody Bellinger. We know Cody Bellinger is going to go back to the Yankees, and we now seen what the Mets' plan was with Robert and Freddy Peralta. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Jack, I think the infrastructure for the New York Mets could allow a player, I'm not going to guarantee it, but could allow a player like Luis Robert to get back to the player that he was. In 2023 is the season that you would circle, right? That's if you could get that player, this is a home run. This is a steal for the Mets to get the 2023 version of Luis Robert. But even if he's just a player that he was last year, to your point, stole 33 bases last season, hit 14 home runs. He was the 12th ranked center fielder by outs above average last season. So you're getting an elite, and I use that word very carefully, but an elite defender in center field. If you just get the 2025 version of Luis Robert, you're getting a better center fielder than the Mets trotted out there last season. And it's my expectation that away from Chicago, where, let's face it, do we think the player development in Chicago is up to the standard that the Mets have in terms of player development and getting the most, right? The pitching lab has been on full display for the Mets. You think their hitting side isn't that far behind? Do you think the White Sox have the infrastructure? Do you think they have the organizational knowledge and skills set up to get the most out of a player? No, you would consider them one of the worst organizations in the sport in that regard. So you get him in a situation where he's playing for a winner. He's going to have more tools at his disposal than he had in Chicago. He's going to be surrounded by Marcus Semien and Bo Bichette, who are, awesome leaders, Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor and superstars. I mean, it's just going to be such a different situation for him to where I just expect him to bounce back and be closer to 2023 Luis Robert than 2025. And if that's the case, the going rate in baseball right now is you pay $11 million per WAR. If he's a 2-WAR player next season, the Mets have hit a home run here. And to your point, they just didn't give up a whole lot considering where their roster was at. Now, it's a short-term commitment, which I love. You get Robert out of Chicago. I think that's going to help him. And I also just love what this allows the Mets to do with Carson Bench, because while I love Carson Bench and I think he can play on opening day next season, it doesn't put the Mets in a position where they're forced to play him next year, right? I think the one move that is left for the Mets after what they did today is to go out and get a left fielder. Austin Hayes is a name that's been thrown out there quite a bit as somebody they can sign. I wonder if they sign Harrison Bader and stick him maybe in the corner spot, to not put so much pressure on Carson Bench being the opening day left fielder. And Brett Beatty, now with, Bo Bichette playing third, it frees up Beatty to maybe play left field. Now that you have a center fielder, you can put Carson Bench in a position to say, okay, if you crush it in spring, fine, we'll give you the left field spot. But if you don't, we'll let you go down to Syracuse and dominate, and then when we need you, you will be ready to go for the big league level. So I think that's the other part of this that I love. The floor gets raised for the Mets' big league level team, but it also increases the range of outcomes for Carson Bench, and it doesn't put the Mets in a position where they force him to be out there. And to go back to an earlier conversation we've had on this podcast, it just allows there to be less question marks, where if Carson Bench does start in left field, you feel good about center, you feel good about right, you feel good about third, short, second, first, you feel good about basically everywhere else with the way the Mets have structured this, to where Carson Bench being, a work in progress, a project, an experiment out there in left field, you can kind of take those lumps. So I love it from that perspective, and I just love the player that the Mets are getting. Again, it's $20 million, but at the end of the year, if they want to move on, it costs $2 million in a buyout. They'll be happy to move on. It's a short-term commitment. It doesn't lock them into anything. And it's funny here because, Jack, in my notes, I had what's left for the Mets to do this offseason, and the bullet point below it was get a pitcher. That was where my notes were earlier today. I can erase that from the notes because we'll get to Freddy Peralta here in a second. But any other thoughts on Luis Robert and what he brings to the Mets? Maybe some potential lineup configurations. I had one working in my head that I liked earlier today on social media.
I'm interested to hear what you have to say. I would say, like, for right now, off the top of my head, it's Lindor at your 1. I think Robert has a chance to be in the 2 spot just because of the speed that he brings, and like if he's able to hit well enough or get on base well enough, that's a pretty nice extra player to have near the top. Otherwise, maybe Soto in the 2 spot, maybe Bichette in the 2 spot.
I had Soto in the 2 spot.
Have the other one in the 3 spot.
Yep.
And then Robert could also be your cleanup hitter if he's a guy that can hit 40-ish home runs like he did 2 seasons ago. I don't know. What were your I don't have like a full lineup in my head just off the top.
So here's what I had workshopped earlier today, and I will say I like the first half of it. The bottom half of the lineup I think can get moved around based on who's hot and matchup dependent stuff. But I have Lindor, Soto, Bichette, Polanco, and I have Polanco playing first base right now. And then I have Robert in the 5-hole, Alvarez 6, Beatty 7 playing left field. I have Vientos DHing, and then I have Marcus Semien in the 9 spot playing second base. And I just think that gives you the most balance. And it also, I think, protects Soto with Bichette right behind him. It gives you a really good 1-2-3. It doesn't put too much pressure on Robert, putting him in the cleanup spot, but it does provide protection with Polanco in front of him and Alvarez behind him. Could you make the case to move Robert down and flip him in Beatty? Sure. And listen, if they bat Robert in the bottom third of the lineup in order to get his confidence going, I could understand that. But he had a really good second half. He hit nearly 300 in the second half of the season last year. Right. So he certainly ended 2025 on a great note. But yeah, the first 4 I love: Lindor, Soto, Bichette, Polanco. I think 5 through 9 is going to be based on who's hot at the time, and depending on who's on the mound opposite, you can play the matchup game to avoid, stacking lefties and righties for, relievers late. But yeah, I mean, the Mets lineup got so much deeper with this move, and then seeing Bichette, down on paper in the lineup, it makes you feel so much better about what they've put together.
Yeah, I think just going through that and in my head, like, Semien is a pretty safe 9 hitter just because he's obviously the glove first guy at second base. But I think that 5 through 8, Chris, like, that can be super variable with Beatty, Vientos, Alvarez, and Robert, like, in some order there. Like, we've seen Mark Vientos play like a guy who can hit in the 2 spot or the 3 spot. Oh,
Swaggy B. The Swaggy B is not an 8 spot hitter. And Swaggy B is the top half of the lineup guy.
Right. And we've seen Brett Beatty go on stretches where looks like an excellent power hitter that could be in the middle of that lineup as well. And I don't know. I am so much more excited about the depth that this lineup has, where you're not taking out offensive capability to increase the defensive capabilities of the team, right? Like, I love Tyrone Taylor as a defender, but as a bat, he's not a plus part of the Mets lineup. Adding Luis Robert, he has so much more upside in that center field spot and brings you elite defense. So you're not necessarily sacrificing one for the other. I think Beatty, if he can pan out as a left fielder or in any kind of versatile role that he has, had the season that gives you confidence with his bat that you're not sacrificing either way as well. And then Mark Vientos, we know, like, when he's on, he is on as one of the best power hitting third baseman DHs that the Mets could ever hope for. And I'm really excited about how much deeper this lineup looks with Luis Robert, with Bo Bichette in it now, versus how it looked for a lot of last season and then for most of this offseason as well.
Yeah, and again, I put that lineup assuming Carson Bench started the year in Syracuse. If Bench plays with his hair on fire in spring training, because again, the Mets have made it very clear he's going to get every opportunity to win a job. If that happens, then all of a sudden Beatty's in the DH spot. You have Carson Bench playing left field, or maybe you put Beatty at first base, and now you move Vientos to a bench role, and it deepens your bench late to have some options. So just so many configurations that the team can put together. I'll be very interested to see how Carlos Mendoza deploys these guys, and we won't get that answer early in spring. I think we'll get it more towards the back part of spring, right? Those last couple of games is where you start to see what the lineup might look like on opening day. But again, with Robert, I think the ceiling is super high, and I think for what the Mets need in 2026, the floor is super high. You're going to get the speed, you're going to get the defense. I mean, Opening day, Simeon, Lindor, Robert up the middle. It doesn't get much better than that in this sport defensively, right? The offense with Simeon and Robert, it's going to be a question mark. I get it. But defensively, I mean, there's not a whole lot that's going to get by the New York Mets. And I know there's worries about Bichette at third and Polanco at first, but defensively, the Mets are a much improved baseball team from last year. And so the floor of the stolen bases, the defense, the ability to hit lefties, the power, I just think if Luis Robert is the 2025 version of himself, the Mets are a better team, and I expect him to be better than that in the Mets hitting lab, a full spring working with this coaching staff. Let Troy Snitker get to work with Luis Robert, and let's just see what it looks like at the beginning of the season. I was excited just to talk about Luis Robert on this podcast.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
but wait, there's more.
I can't believe the last 24 hours that we've had, and like the last thing I want to say to like put the last cherry on top of the Robert conversation, like if Carson Bench is the prospect that the Mets think he is, and they clearly value him very highly, he's a guy that they're prepping to take over an outfielder role in the starting lineup, maybe as soon as opening day. If he's that good and Robert is able to play like a little bit better than the 25 version of himself, maybe somewhere in between the 25 and 23 versions of himself, this team is going to be outstanding and a true contender, I think, in 2026.
Yeah, their floor got raised today. Their floor got raised, and if you want to throw in Bo Bichette because he got introduced to the media today, the floor of the New York Mets got better today. In so many different ways. And, I feel like the guy on the infomercial saying, but wait, there's more. Call right now and you'll get this throw in because they then went out and traded for Freddy Peralta. The Mets got their ace. The long rumored, was it going to be the Mets? Was it going to be the Yankees? Who was going to land Freddy Peralta? You knew Milwaukee wasn't going to be able to keep him around. He wasn't going to sign a long-term deal there. And I don't know how much appetite there was for Milwaukee to give out that long-term deal. And the Mets say, hey, we'll dangle two really great prospects in front of you, and we'll get Freddy Peralta, and the Mets get their guy, Jack. 30-plus starts each of the last 3 seasons, a sub-3 ERA last year, a sub-4 ERA the previous 2 years. This is one of the best pitchers in the sport right now, and the Mets have him at the front of their rotation with Nolan McLean going into the 2026 season.
It feels like the Mets, for the first time since Jacob deGrom left the team, have a bona fide ace at the top of their rotation. And I know Nolan McLean was kind of that guy for us, so we thought that he could be that level,
it's 8 starts,
level
right? It's unfair
player.
to put that on him, right?
We've seen some excellent starts from him, but we don't know if he's there quite yet. The Mets right now have a proven over multiple years major league ace level pitcher who had, I think, the best season of his career last year.
No doubt.
For everything I've read, like his velocity is ticking up, like he could be even better going forward. And I'm thrilled about the top of the Mets rotation now versus where it was 35 minutes ago.
Get me Freddy Peralta and Justin Willard working on something for this upcoming season. Yeah, I mean, look, this is one of the best pitchers in the sport. He's 15th among starters last year in his strikeout minus walk rate. I mean, he just strikes guys out, has one of the best fastballs in the game, tops out at about 95 miles an hour on average. And it's just somebody who takes the ball every 5 days for you and goes out there and shoves. 30 starts, like I mentioned, each of the last 3 seasons. There's not many pitchers in the sport right now that has that claim to fame of, I am a workhorse. And not only am I a workhorse, like there are workhorses that take the ball every 5th day and they eat up innings and they've got a 4.5 ERA and you take that, right? Adrian Hauser, right? That's just a name that comes to mind. Freddy Peralta takes the ball every 5th day. He's a workhorse and he's also elite. He is also exceptional. Now, the interesting conversation that we'll have here, because it is a 1-year rental of Freddy Peralta. At least as of right now, the Mets have not agreed to an extension with him. They gave up quite a bit. Brandon Sproat, Jet Williams going out the door. Now, the Mets did not just get Freddy Peralta. They did get Tobias Myers back in the deal because David Stearns can't help himself. He's always got to try to find one player to throw in a deal to try to convince everybody he's the smartest guy in the room. And he probably is, considering the moves that he's made today. But it's Brandon Sproat. It's Jet Williams. It is 2 top 10 prospects for the New York Mets system. It's 2 top 100 prospects. If you look at Fangraphs top 100 at the end of 2025, they haven't put out their 2026 list just yet. It is a hefty, hefty price for a rental. I think this goes to show how important the Mets thought getting an ace was to their entire offseason. But I also think, Jack, this is a show of the strength of the Mets farm system, that David Stearns felt comfortable enough to give away one of his best pitching prospects and one of his best overall prospects in Jet Williams to make this deal happen.
I think what it ultimately comes down to, and this has been my logic pretty much since I saw what the return was for Freddy Peralta, I just earlier talked about why giving up Luis Angel Acuna made sense for the Mets, and it was because they have so many infielders already. We talked about David Stearns joking at the Bo Bichette's introductory press conference today. The Mets are pretty much set up to have 4 shortstops playing in their infield between Polanco, Bichette, Lindor, and Simeon at those 4 spots. You add in guys like Brett Beatty, like Mark Vientos, like Ronnie Mauricio, who's still on the team, and the Mets just don't have room for yet another infielder, even if it's one of their top prospects in Jet Williams, to come up and really contribute on a daily, consistent level. Jet Williams was not going to play shortstop. The Mets already have a guy set in stone there. They were not going to play, or he was not going to play second base. The Mets already have a guy, a veteran that they just traded for this offseason, set there. He wasn't going to play third base because the Mets just brought in Bo Bichette to play at that position for at least 2026. He wasn't going to play first. Doesn't really have the experience, the size, the range, whatever.
He's too tiny to play
Jorge
first base.
Polanco is going to play first. After the Luis Robert trade, he wasn't going to play center field, and he probably wasn't going to play left field either, because that's where Carson Bench is projected to play once he's ready to play. Obviously, he was not going to play in right field with Juan Soto there. You run out of spots for a guy like Jet Williams to come up and contribute. And for the Mets, their philosophy has been, look, when we bring the rookies up, we want them to contribute. We didn't bring up Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat, and Nolan McLean to just pitch one time through the order to get us through a rough stretch down the home stretch of the season. We wanted them to come up and contribute and fight for potentially a spot in the playoff rotation, or at least in the bullpen. And I just think that with Williams, they ran out of room. There was no room for Williams in the infield at any spot, nor in the outfield. And so that made sense from that aspect. And then for the Sproat side of things, he was the last guy up of the 3 kid pitchers the Mets brought up last season, with Nolan McLean and Jonah Tong preceding him. Yes, he was the guy that started the season as the highest rated of those 3 guys, but he had some ups and downs throughout his time in AAA over 2024 and 2025. And so, again, you bring in Freddy Peralta and you bring in Tobias Myers, 2 more pitchers. The starting rotation already was getting pretty crowded, with even just at the bottom of your rotation, McLean, I guess more at the top, but then Tong, Christian Scott, Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, David Peterson, Clay Holmes. There were a lot of starting pitchers that the Mets needed to find spots for, and Brandon Sproat was kind of the odd man out there. And I just feel like, logically, the Mets wanted to bring in a guy who is an established front end of the rotation, guy who can start a playoff game for you, has started 30 games over the last however many seasons, versus Brandon Sproat, who maybe his ceiling is super high, but he's pitched 4 games at the major league level. At the end of the day, Chris, it goes back to that Family Guy meme with the mystery box or the boat. Freddy Peralta is the boat. Brandon Sproat could be a Freddy Peralta style, Freddy Peralta level, ace level dominant pitcher. But Freddy Peralta is Freddy Peralta, and you have to take that proven known asset if you can get your hands on him in a trade in this way.
Yeah, I think, and I said this to you pre-show, that I do think this is a lot when you're considering it just as a rental. I think if they had traded for him, and you joked that there was a bit of a delay between when the initial reports came out that this was, trending towards happening, to the ultimate pass-in Will Salmon tweet of it's done, the Mets are getting Freddy Peralta. And you joked with me that you thought the delay was because the Mets were trying to get an extension worked out, right? They were trying to maybe, lay the groundwork for that to maybe be able to announce both at the same time. And I think I would feel differently about the price the Mets paid if they got an extension done, because then it's more palatable to give up the control of Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat. I want to be on record here, and I want to be careful. This was a lot for Freddy Peralta. Like, I think it's okay to say the Mets gave up a lot for Freddy Peralta, and I think it's also okay to say the Mets got Freddy Peralta. Like, they had to give up a lot to get Freddy Peralta, and it may have been an overpay, but with the health of the Mets system, I think it's more palatable. And let me explain why I think it's more palatable. Because you talked about Sproat in particular. of the big three, and sorry to Christian Scott that he's not part of the big three. He's just kind of forgotten about in this whole pitching, mess that the Mets have in a good way at the back end of their rotation. But Nolan McLean, I thought was untouchable. The two prospects I said you cannot move if you're David Stearns this offseason are Carson Bench and Nolan McLean. Just not happening. Those two guys aren't going anywhere. With Brendan Sproat, of the three pitchers, I think he ranks third if you asked people inside the sport to rank McLean, Tong, and Sproat. That they would have McLean 1, Tong 2, and Sproat 3. And Sproat is the high floor, low ceiling guy. He's the guy that's going to profile probably as a number 3, number 4 starter. The comp that I would give is like a Merrill Kelly. Like just somebody who's going to be good, sometimes really good, but never going to be great. Just going to be a really solid middle of the rotational. Or Jonah Tong, with the fastball, the life on the changeup, the idea is, boy, the floor is very volatile if his repertoire doesn't, round into form. But that ceiling is, this is a top 10 pitcher in all of baseball. And I think the Mets were more comfortable. Okay, you want the high floor guy? Fine. We believe in our pitching development. We believe in our pitching lab. We believe in what we're doing here. Jonah Tong is going to reach that ceiling, reach that potential of being a top 10 pitcher, top 15 pitcher in the sport. And so we're going to hold on to him. So that's why I'm okay with giving up Sproat. Jet, I think you laid it out perfectly. Where is he going to play? The Mets have had him playing second base and center field. Second base is locked up by Marcus Semien for the next couple of years. And even if it's not, even if Marcus Semien has a bad year and the Mets try to move out of this, they'll just move Bo Bichette to second base because that's where he played last season. And then they'll open up third. Then it's center field. Carson Bench is going to play center field. Like, if Luis Robert has a good season, the Mets are going to pick up the option. If he doesn't, they're going to buy him out and then move Carson Bench to center field. So it wasn't an easy fit for the Mets, and David Stearns wants these kids to play, and there was no path for them to play, and so he decided that he was comfortable, and I think it helps that they have the other pitchers in the pipeline. I think it helps that you have Carson Bench in the system, that you have, Jacob Reimer, you have A.J. Ewing, you have other players coming through the pipeline that are starting to get, national recognition as being, some of the top prospects in the Mets system. I mean, Baseball America rated the Mets system this morning as the best system in baseball. And so it allows you to do this. Is it a risk? Absolutely. If it doesn't work out, you gave up two prospects. Freddie Peralta may walk in free agency, but the flip side to this, Jack, and this is me kind of convincing myself that it was okay that they gave up so much. Tarek Skubal is going to be a free agent next year. Mm-hmm. And I don't worry about the Mets losing out on Freddie Peralta and then going, oh, shucks. Maybe we'll just sit it out. Maybe we won't go get somebody in free agency, or we won't make another trade. No. They'll be uber aggressive to replace him. And maybe by the time 2027 rolls around, Jonah Tong blossoms. Nolan McLean has another excellent season. Kodai Senga bounces back. Sean Manaea bounces back. And you can feel better about the state of the rotation. So there's so many variables between now and 2027. And who knows, maybe they work out an extension between now and opening day, and this is all a moot point. But look, it's two top 10 prospects in the system, including, according to Fangraphs at the end of last season, the number one prospect. Brendan Sproat, according to Fangraphs in the middle of 2025, was their number one prospect in the system. And I like using Fangraphs over MLB Pipeline, just personally. And it's two top 100 prospects overall. It is a lot for a rental. But the Mets now have an ace. They move McLean to the number 2 spot, which I think just deepens their rotation. And they add Bo Bichette and they add Luis Robert in the last couple of days. It has just been a fantastic, fantastic last 5 or 6 days for the New York Mets. And I kind of want to close with this, Jack, if you don't mind. Boy, I don't want to hear anything about how bad David Stearns is as an executive. I do not want to hear it anymore. If you want to continue to bash David Stearns, we're watching two different sports.
I'm fully with you. I think the biggest thing on my mind regarding David Stearns this offseason was just, how are you going to answer these big question marks that you still have outlying on your roster? By letting Pete Alonso walk, by trading Brandon Nimmo away, what are you going to do to replace those players who have been around for so long and have become entrenched in a lot of Mets fans' hearts, mine included, just as members of the core that we had watched play for my team for so long? And he's answered those questions and passed my test with flying colors, as far as you add Bo Bichette to increase the floor and the ceiling of your lineup as far as offense. You add Luis Robert to increase the floor and the potential ceiling of your team as far as defense and maybe even offense. You've answered the question of who's going to play or who's going to pitch at the top of your rotation, because that was, I think, the biggest thing outlying for me pretty much all offseason, given what the Mets rotation looked like for the last couple of months last season. You answer that with Freddy Peralta, who's one of the best pitchers in baseball and an ace level guy at the top of the rotation. I don't really have any more questions, Chris, other than is Carson Bench going to be on the opening day roster? And that's something that only he can answer based on spring training performance. So I am in awe of how well this last week has gone for the Mets and for David Stearns, even after losing out, quote unquote, on the two guys that we thought that the Mets might be signing, and Kyle Tucker and Cody Bellinger. They found solutions elsewhere and made the team significantly better than it was a week ago. And I think, and Steve Gelbs of SNY thinks, better than it was going into last season.
Yeah, I mean, I know it hurts to say because, they're household names and they're homegrown talents, and you don't want to see Pete Alonso walk, you don't want to see Brandon Nimmo go, you don't want to see Jeff McNeil get traded, but the Mets are just a better baseball team. They're better in every important metric. They got better in terms of hitting with runners in scoring position. They got better in terms of the defense. They got better in terms of the contact rate and just the bat-to-ball profile. They got rid of a lot of the strikeouts that you're going to see in this lineup. They're just going to be able to keep the line moving more, and they got better in the pitching department. I know losing Edwin Diaz hurt, but going from Edwin Diaz to Devin Williams and Luke Weaver with Brooks Raley and AJ Minter in the back of that bullpen, I think they're better out there. Would I like another arm? Yeah, I would. I would like another arm out there to make me feel better. But, David Stern says this all the time. Bullpens are a living, breathing organism. The group that you start opening day with is not the group you end the season with. And so if there's one area that I'm okay with it being a work in progress, it's that bullpen, because it's going to morph as the season moves on. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot of projection into what Bo Bichette's going to be at third base. Yeah, it's a lot of projection into Luis Robert bouncing back. But even if they are, even if Bichette is an okay defender at third, if Luis Robert is just a little bit better than he was in 23, I think Carson Bench and Luis Robert in left and center is better than Nimmo and Taylor, right? I think it's better than what that would have been. I think this infield configuration is better than if Pete Alonso would have stuck around. And I know that hurts. Like, it hurts to say that out loud, but I think the Mets are better. And I also think, I thought about this today, and I don't know if you've thought about this at all. And this is going to be a weird comp, so just go with me. Go with me on this journey. We're getting weird here at the end of the episode.
Okay.
Is Bo Bichette just a better version of Jose Iglesias? And what I mean by that is not what Jose Iglesias brought in terms of the player, but what Jose Iglesias brought in terms of the vibes. Now, I don't think Bo Bichette's going to be doing post-game concerts at Citi Field, but I'm talking about being that vibes guy that gets the clubhouse motivated, that brings the energy, that plays hard every day. Like, that's what Iglesias did so well, and the rest of the team rallied around. That's what Bichette is known for up in Toronto. And so I'm hoping the Mets can get back to that in some way with a player that, let's face it, is a whole lot better than what Iglesias was for the Mets in Bo Bichette. So I don't know, man. I'm really excited. Today was a really big day for the Mets. We're recording this on, Wednesday night. You'll probably hear this Thursday morning. But the Mets got better today, and this is why you let an offseason play out. This is why you judge an offseason at the end rather than in the middle as it's going on. That's why we said all offseason long, just wait. Just wait. There are still good players on the board. There's still opportunity. They haven't missed on everybody. And yeah, they missed on Tucker. And boy, did that episode hurt to record. But they pivoted, and they pivoted in a big way.
Yeah, I just think, as far as the Bichette comp, the first thing that comes to mind for me is when you have a guy like that in the building, you have a guy like Francisco Lindor who's able to play in New York, and a guy that is not officially the captain of the Mets, but has played and has been, as far as the locker room clubhouse presence that he's been, a captain of this team. And I think when you add a guy like Luis Robert, who I think is still young and very malleable as a player, who's had a lot of time in Chicago surrounded by a lot of other younger guys, and maybe a culture that wasn't all that great, and an ownership that, let's face it, was also not that great. And you bring him into a situation where he's surrounded by these guys like Juan Soto, like Francisco Lindor, like a Bo Bichette, as you were saying. The vibes are just going to be pushing him towards this direction to be a better player. And I think all of these players together are going to be pushing each other to be better and better and better. And I think as we see the season progress, we're going to see this unit become a very cohesive, maybe new core that the Mets are able to build around over the next couple of years. I'm just getting very excited thinking about the potential that this roster has now and just how much better that it can be going forward.
Yeah, I was concerned. I think I said it on a pod. I know I said it to you off air, that I was concerned about David Stearns being able to pull all this off in one offseason, that there was so much new that was going to be required. But with Bo Bichette and Luis Robert, and now with Freddy Peralta as the cherry on top, I think you can safely say that the Mets did it. They rebuilt their team in one offseason. Will it work? got to play the games, right? Don't know if it's going to work. It certainly feels better. It certainly feels like the Mets checked all their boxes, achieved all their goals this offseason. And now, unfortunately, it's chasing down the Dodgers, right? It's winning the division. It's beating the Phillies. It's beating the Braves, but it's ultimately trying to chase down those Dodgers in the National League. But I think you can put a wrap on all the big major moves for the New York Mets. And before you know it, spring training is going to be here. Pitchers and catchers report in 2 weeks or so? So we are right around the corner from Mets baseball being back. And boy, the Mets certainly saved the best for last. They really just wanted to make sure we stuck with them throughout the whole offseason. But yeah, what a great day for the Mets. Bo Bichette introduced, Luis Robert acquired, and they cap it all off with a trade for Freddy Peralta. If you are new here, please rate, review, subscribe to the show wherever you are listening to us. If you want to watch the podcast, you want to watch the video version of the show, just search Jack McKessie on YouTube, McKessy. Shout out to our YouTube audience. Lots of new viewers over there on the YouTube
Huge
side of
support.
things. So we appreciate you joining us over there as well. And share this episode, whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us in the podcast feed. Just share it with a Mets fan friend. We are back beginning of next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about. We've been doing this whole thing where what's next for the New York Mets? They're kind of done. So I don't know what the future holds for this pod, but don't you worry. We'll have lots of Mets action to start talking about here very, very soon. There's much excitement in my voice as I close the podcast and I get to my favorite part of the podcast where I say those 3 magic words. We'll talk to you guys next time. And as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.